There is a condition of sauerkraut that I call disappearing brine. It's when the brine appears to disappear. I'm going to share with you what happened and what to do and not do. I've literally made hundreds of vegetable fermentations and have noticed that disappearing brine predominantly happens with one type of ferment in particular, and that's sauerkraut. Does it happen every time with every sauerkraut? No, but with over 50% of my homemade krauts, yes. Other people may have a greater or lesser occurrence of disappearing brine, but nonetheless, it happens. These are sauerkrauts currently in my fridge. One has the case of disappearing brine and one does not. Here are some sauerkrauts active in fermentation on the counter. Some have disappeared brine, others don't. Why not all of them, one way or the other? Who knows, but this I do know, where the brine went and what to do about it. The brine is not really evaporating or whimsically disappearing. What's happening is the cabbage is absorbing it. If you use the dry salt method of making sauerkraut like how I demonstrate in my Sauerkraut Masterclass video, originally the salt pulls the juice out of the cabbage during preparation, making its own brine, so to speak. The fermentation starts off with plenty of high brine levels, only to reabsorb it later down the road. Let me assure you, nothing went wrong and you did nothing wrong. This actually isn't a bad thing because the fermentation is still safe to eat and still safe to store long term. Here is what not to do. Do not, I repeat, do not make a new handmade brine with salt and water and add it to the jar. Why? Because it will raise the pH of the fermentation and disrupt the sauerkraut's beneficial bacteria ecology, aka it's going to cause an upset to the probiotics. If you didn't see this video in time and you've already added the extra brine, don't panic. I've got a section in this video where I'll address your situation, and don't worry, it's going to be okay. But first I'm going to explain the why behind the don't, and then I will address the uh-oh, I already did it situation, and then a third scenario that is the one and only exception to the do nothing principle. So be sure to watch the entire video so that you don't miss out. First and foremost, let's understand the why, which will help you become a confident and competent fermenter as you continue along your fermenting journey. Plain water and or saltwater brine is not acidic. It typically has a pH anywhere between 6 and 8, so being either neutral or alkaline. Why is the pH important? This is why. An acidic pH below 4.5 kills bad pathogens, including botulism. However, just the opposite is the case with the good bacteria. The good bacteria are not killed by their own acid-produced environment. Key phrase, their own acid environment. The beneficial bacteria responsible for vegetable fermentation is a type of bacteria called lactobacillus. The lactobacillus feed on natural sugars in the food and release lactic acid as their byproduct. As the lactobacillus feed and multiply, the concentration of the lactic acid in the brine increases. Hence, the increasing lactic acid drops the pH below 4.5, safeguarding the food from harmful pathogens and enabling long-term preservation in cool temperatures like in a root cellar or refrigerator. So you see here, a fermentation doesn't start out acidic, it develops into acidity through the fermentation process of the good bacteria. So if you add more saltwater brine that has a higher pH, you'll end up raising the fermentation's pH above 4.5 and opening the door to potential unwanted pathogens. Secondly, the fresh saltwater brine or plain water added along the way will disrupt the delicate probiotic ecology within the jar and cause a hindrance to the lactobacillus strength and balance. Compromising the balance creates a weakness, which can open the door to spoilage. Now, don't get me wrong, just because you did this doesn't mean your sauerkraut or fermentation is instantaneously ruined or spoiled. So hang with me, we're going to keep going with this. Let's talk about adding vinegar, since I know many are wondering. Although vinegar is acidic with a low pH, it will disrupt the lactobacillus ecology inside the jar. How can this be if vinegar is acidic? Vinegar is an acetic acid created by a bacteria called Acetobacter. It is not a lactic acid fermentation created by lactobacillus like what's in your jar of sauerkraut. Vinegar pickling and vegetable fermentation are not the same. and not simpatico. Vinegar kills microbes, even the good ones. That's why it's an amazing preservation method used for centuries and used as a kitchen cleanser. But if you're going through the work of the vegetable fermentation process, I'm guessing it's because you want the probiotics to be alive and well. There aren't lactobacillus probiotics in vinegar pickled foods because they're killed off. I have an older video on this topic if you want to watch after this, but I'm not going to go further down this trail. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to watch that video. Plus, I'll include a video where I go further in depth between the difference of a vinegar pickled food and a fermented food. But for here and now, I'll also address the situation if you've already added the vinegar. Let's get back on topic of pH and disappearing brine. If you take a pH reading of a fermentation that has reabsorbed its brine before you do anything, you will see that the pH is actually still below 4.5, which is exactly where it should be without any added human help. How can this be if the brine appears to be gone? Well, when the cabbage reabsorbs the original lactic acid brine, it's essentially inoculating the sauerkraut with acidity literally all the way through. That lactic acid saturation inside and out of the sauerkraut is what will continue to protect the cabbage from spoilage, whether it be week 2 of the fermentation period or while in the fridge for the next several months. So my advice is less about what to do as it is what not to do. To sum up, before I address the other issues, do nothing and leave it be for all the reasons given. And if in doubt, take a pH reading. If it's below 4.5, even better if it's between 3 and 4, you and your kraut are good to go even with disappeared brine. Now what you've been waiting for, what to do if you've already done it. First, don't worry. It's not an automatic death sentence to your fermentation. It may get knocked back a bit or unbalanced, but in most cases, if the fermentation was strong and healthy to begin with, it will bounce back and rebalance. I just think it's best not to have to put the microbes in that situation of having to do so in the first place. But keep an eye on it. If you've added more brine or water, pH test it daily to make sure the pH drops again below 4.5. If it does, you're back on track and just don't do it again. Leave it be. Plus, you'll probably notice that it will just simply reabsorb again in the next day or two. If after 3 or 4 days the pH hasn't dropped again below 4.5, end the fermentation period by transferring it to the refrigerator and eating it within a week or 2. It won't be able to go the long haul, but if eaten relatively quickly while stored in the fridge, it will be fine. And if you did this while the kraut was in long-term storage, simply end the long-term part of the storage and eat it sooner than later. If you went the vinegar route, since the vinegar is acidic and depending on how much you added, it's going to be really tough to know if the lactobacillus were severely knocked back or just a little knocked back or what, because the pH will still read below 4.5. We can't see with our eyes the lactobacillus population or ask them how they're doing. Most likely, if you didn't add a ton of vinegar, but maybe just a splash or very diluted, and the fermentation was strong to begin with, the vinegar may have done a light setback of the local lactobacillus that came in contact with it, but overall, the lactobacillus population is strong enough to overcome, and you haven't sterilized your fermentation into a pickled cabbage rather than a fermented cabbage. Just don't add any more. Here is the one and only exception to my do nothing advice: mold. Mold will not develop solely because of disappeared brine. Like I mentioned, most of my sauerkrauts end up with reabsorbed brine and I never get mold as a result. So if you do have a mold situation, it tells me there is some kind of invisible contamination, otherwise the mold would not have formed. And if you're familiar with my videos, then you know that I really press the point of keeping all foods submerged beneath the brine as to prevent mold. But disappearing brine is a little different, so it might be fair to say it's an exception to the rule, because the brine has actually inoculated the cabbage all the way through with that acidity. So back to mold. If the mold growth is minuscule, the fermentation can be saved. However, if the mold has become moderate to advanced, the fermentation should be discarded due to the mold mycotoxins released into the entire fermentation beyond the point of mold to food contact. I consider mold a different topic than disappearing brine, so I'm not going to go further, but do check out my mold video sources, which are my fermentation checklist video and my fermentation funk mold video. I'll place the links in the description for you to check out. I actually designed my fermentation checklist video for new fermenters, since many newbies just don't quite yet feel confident eating their first fermentation. The checklist will walk you through each checkpoint to know if the fermentation is safe to eat or not. The checklist is available as a video and also as ta-da, a printable worksheet. You'll find the links in the description. You may have caught that I mentioned I also have a video on the 5 safeguards of fermentation, which contains different information than the 4-point checklist. So be sure to watch that video on your way to becoming a confident and competent fermenter. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.